verified.
Yeah, we're live now. Okay. All right, so we're going to get started now that we have the live stream working. So Daniel was trying to issue a link ahead of time for the event, and then we were trying to connect into it. Didn't go so well, so we bailed on it. But we are live under a different link than we advertised, which is kind of fun. Welcome. Thanks for coming, everybody. I know we've been a little inconsistent lately with our meetups. We're going to get better at that, so we're going to make sure that we're doing the regular time and location. So tonight we're doing lightning talks, which is our kind of community engagement small talks. So anybody who's working with mobile, if you want to get up here and talk about what you're doing, talk about your experiences, you are more than welcome. We'd love to have you come up and share your experience. So our regular time and location is the third Tuesday of the month at 6 p.m. here at Hacker U. I've got it as 483 Queen Street West, but we kind of go back and forth between next door, where Mark went at first, and here, just depending on which room's available. Usually we're at 485, which is this unit. So yeah. Next month we'll be doing another Lightning Talks Part 2, March edition, we're calling it. So we'll be back in either the space next door, probably this space again, and we'll do same kind of thing. So if you've got anything you want to present in, it could be a small thing where you come up here and load up an app and show us what you've done. It could be a concept that you want to demonstrate, or like some code you've written, or whatever. Come up and share your experience. We'd love to have you. So that's, again, Tuesday, March 19th. Then, yeah, call for speakers, pretty self-explanatory at this point. If you want to connect with us, we're basically all over the place with social media. So Daniel and I manage the Twitter stream. Of course, we're on Meetup, and we've got a GitHub repo with a bunch of stuff in there. So if you want to check out a couple of apps that we put in there, some demo code, some projects here and there, it's all under Toronto Mobile Developers. Of course, our live stream is under our YouTube feed. YouTube only allows you to have vanity URLs when you have 100 subscribers, so please subscribe, because we're using a tiny URL link right now because we can't use a vanity URL, and the URL that YouTube gives you is like, it's basically a GUID. It's not very user-friendly. Yeah, much like our WhatsApp link. We've also got a small WhatsApp channel. I should replace that. Just realized that now. We've got a WhatsApp channel that you're welcome to join. We just have small discussions in there, talk about what we're working on, things back and forth. It's a nice little outlet, and a lot less formal than like maybe Slack or something like that. Thanks to our sponsor, BSI Labs. BSI Labs covers the venue and the food and some of our equipment with streaming and things like that. So thanks to BSI Labs. BSI Labs will help you accelerate your mobile development projects, and we're a full-service enterprise mobile development shop. And you can find us on Twitter and at bsilabs.ca. Of course, we always plug our sibling meetup, the Toronto.net meetup. So they're over in the financial district. I believe Mark's got half this presentation coming up at the next week's meeting, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, so some Azure PaaS stuff, and I think, Mark, you're going to talk about how to become an MVP?
Yeah, some of the things you could do to become an MVP.
Awesome. So yeah, if you like Mark's presentation tonight, you should go see him again next week.
Yeah. I have some good tips. 15 years, so.
Awesome. Okay, these slides are slightly out of order, but I'm Dylan Barry. I'm the founder and co-organizer of Toronto Mobile Developers. Daniel's, of course, the other half of the duo here that we organize this and get everybody together. If you enjoy what you see tonight, please tell your friends. Invite everybody who would get something out of this. So now I'm going to start off with our first really quick lightning talk. I kind of phoned it in, I'm not going to lie. I had big, ambitious plans to put together a presentation right after I got back from vacation, and I got back from vacation and went, you know, there's enough other people that I can kind of phone it in. So even this particular topic that I like culled away everything else down to, I went, I'll just go over the highlights. So I was going to do Xamarin Forms tips, really things I've learned from using Xamarin Forms through the years. Instead, what I'm going to cover is just highlights from the last few releases. So this was good for me to revisit too, because I'd forgotten that some of these were in there. I went, oh yeah, right, that was in there in 3.1. We actually had one of these things come up today during one of our Scrum calls. So let's quickly just run through this. So Dave Ortno, who's the project manager over at, or program manager at Microsoft looking after Xamarin Forms, is doing a great job with the team there. They've got a nice 6 week release cadence where they're pushing things out the door faster and in a nice, relatively stable package. I don't know if anybody, who's actually using Xamarin Forms on a regular basis here? A few? Scott, no? Still?
Just for fun, but not professionally.
All right. So if you haven't checked out Xamarin Forms, you should check out Xamarin Forms. If you're not using it professionally, I don't know why you like to hurt yourself. It's at the point now where Xamarin Forms seems like the obvious choice from my perspective anyways. Particularly with the 3.0 release, the 3.x releases have been so much more stable. They've gotten rid of a whole bunch of like pain points, and you can just move a lot faster now. So let's go through some of these. The first one, bindable span. So this was, if you're decorating a label, so if you've got a label in your code and you want to add some formatting to it, you can now bind to the span parts of your label that define different formats in your label. So that's great. Android bottom tab bar, we know that material design always had the tabs at the top and they switched to the bottom. That happened a while ago. Forms was lagging on this. You had to have a custom renderer to put the forms on the bottom. Again, for those of you who don't use Forms, that means you had to drop out of Forms the abstraction that sits on top of the platforms into a platform-specific renderer to make it draw the tabs on the bottom. You don't have to do that anymore. So that's a nice win. The entry and editor, you can now control the button type, whether you got spell check or auto capitalization enabled on those fields, just from a quick little flag toggle. You can make the editor auto size your text change, so it'll actually grow as you're entering text. So it'll start, you can make it start out as one line and grow as you're entering text, which is really nice. You can change the switch and slider color. You can force the web view to evaluate JavaScript. The list view now has a selection mode of none. I know I always had to handle this. It was a pain always to bring in a piece of code just to always have it disregard my selection when I'm using a list view for navigation. In 3.2, swipe gestures are now recognized, so you can hook into a swipe command. So hook a command to a swipe gesture on your device. The next one, navigation page title view. If you're familiar with, or if you'd like to learn a little bit more of this, there's an article that Andrew Heffling from the Rochester Xamarin Group put together around the page title view. It basically means the little title view at the top of your screen now has, you can now control anything in there. So you can put all kinds of custom controls in there. You can put your own back button in there if you want to like mess around with that. Really powerful feature and adds a bunch more flexibility to the platform, which is great. Span gestures and commandable regions. This is kind of going back to what I talked about on the first point. If you've got a span, you can now do stuff with that span, a little more granular control of your strings that you're laying out in labels. You can control your entry caret position and color, which is useful. Editor, placeholder, and placeholder color. You can, the next one, the on platform and on idiom XAML extension is really good. So as you're writing your XAML markup code to define what's going to be laid out on screen, you can have specific sections for if this is a tablet or if this is a phone. It's just a really nice way of defining that. You had to use all kinds of weird hacks before for that. Buttons now have paddings, which is great. You can put rounded corners on a box view. You can set your label line height so you can have better typography. All good stuff. So just like some of those annoying things that you had to drop down to platform specific to actually adjust those things are now bubbled up to the forms level, so you can write it in one place and have it work on both platforms. Some more stuff around the label, so some text decoration and max lines, an image button, which I didn't think was a big deal, but whatever. You can bind your automation ID, which is useful, particularly if you're well, automation ID is one of those interesting things if you don't care about accessibility and do care about UI testing. This one's useful. And XAML compilation, it gives you a little bit better granularity on your error messages when you're compiling XAML and something goes wrong. 3.5, this is the biggest one on the list, not kind of saving the most important one for last. Bindable layouts is huge. I don't know if anybody, there's not a huge amount of people in here using it, but I know I had a repeater view that I used to drag around with me, or various hacks to get like little small binded sections of UI elements on the screen. But now you can bind to a stack layout, you can bind to a flex layout, you can bind to a grid, which is very, very useful. It's something that's kind of been absent from the platform. It's really nice that it's there now. So you don't have to use list view for everything.
A question about the web view evaluated JavaScript. Like,
yep.
Couldn't you do that before too?
You could, but now it's bubbled up to forms. So it's actually, you can force it to evaluate JavaScript from the forms control, the forms abstraction of the web views.
Oh yeah, I thought you could do it from the forms to like in 2.0.
I actually haven't used this, so
it was called evaluate JS, and then you just put your JavaScript inside.
This was lifted from release notes, and some of these I've worked with. This one I have not worked with. So you might want to take a look at that and actually see how it's functioning.
Yeah.
Because I know there was something there before. I only used it once before, like a while ago, so I haven't touched that in a while. I don't know if it's different or if something's significantly changed. Yeah. Either way, if you're interested in that, it's just in the release notes on the site under 3.1. Find it pretty easy.
I remember it was a pain to get the bottom tab bar done.
Oh yeah, that was a huge one.
Everyone wanted to do it, but
I remember the bottom tab bar, like doing it with the renderer was, if you weren't doing anything too fancy, it was okay.
Yeah.
But then as soon as you were doing something with like, you always want to use like glyphs, right? Like icon fonts. And when you start getting that kind of stuff going on and then transitioning between the tabs, it became pretty painful.
Yeah.
So that was a nice one. Any questions on any of this? No? Yes? Good. 3.6. So this is basically what's marked as going to be part of 3.6. Some better tab index for both platforms, which is great. Read-only entry property. I know this is something people have been asking for a while. That one's probably going to be in there because it's already completed. Android WebView zoom controls, which, sure, if you're using WebViews, embed in your app heavily. I'm sure that's a helpful thing. Pin source for map, I know that's another one that was really missing from the map controls. There's a lot of things missing from the map controls. Hopefully they're continuing to add to it. And slider drag events and commands, so you can actually attach to interactions with the slider, which is great. And if you want to look at the roadmap, it's up on GitHub under Xamarin Forms. There's a whole bunch of stuff constantly being added there. I didn't say anything about 4.0 here, but there's a lot coming in 4.0, collection view being like the biggest one, and probably shell being the other biggest one. So those are interesting. And this is it for me. Anybody have any?
Can you talk a little bit about the shell view, or if you know much about it?
Yeah, shell's kind of interesting because Dave Ordno put out a survey on Twitter, I think it was yesterday or the day before, asking, the survey was all about shell, and basically, here's shell, what do you think of it? Please give your stream of consciousness. It's kind of an interesting way of evaluating what your thoughts are on shell. It's basically a way of setting up your navigation structure in like a one-page. It's almost like a XAML sitemap is one way I could say one way I could describe it. Another way I could describe it is a drawn abstraction instead of a native control abstraction. It's kind of those two things married together. So it's all centered right now around material design. So things aren't actually rendering in native controls. It's drawn controls on screen, and you can also define your application's navigation in one XAML page. So you have your app.xaml that defines basically how you're going to structure your tabs, how you're going to structure your master detail, if you're going to use a master detail, all in one document. So it's interesting. I'm not sure how I feel about it yet. I haven't used it enough. It's one of those things it's like everything in software development. Until you start using it and actually build something, it's hard to really get a good feel for how it's going to work and where the edges are and where it's going to break and what's going to be difficult. So yeah, that's all I got on it so far. Anybody else touch Shell at all? Mark, have you touched it yet?
I haven't touched it yet, but I heard it's to help developers get up and running faster.
That's, yeah.
Targeting enterprise developers.
Yeah.
So just make it a little bit easier to get up and running.
Some of the concepts in there are really good. I really like being able to define the navigation in one area, kind of like a sitemap, but the fact that it's mixed with non-native kind of makes me go, well, what problem are you solving there, right?
Yeah, I think it's just getting people up and running fast.
I guess so.
Sometimes it's a pain point.
Yeah.
Getting started with that.
Yeah.
And maybe this might solve it.
Yeah. It's not gonna hurt. I can't see that. I think from my perspective, it's the mix of a concept like having navigation defined in one place with a kind of break from Xamarin Forms traditional approach. Because Xamarin Forms, for those of you who haven't used it, Xamarin Forms basically is an abstraction that sits on top of each platform's native controls. So you've got your Android native controls and you've got your iOS native controls, and they take, if you think of it like a Venn diagram, you've got iOS, you've got Android, where they intersect, those are the controls exposed in Xamarin Forms, and you can use those to build in XAML or C#, a UI that will look the same, or look similar and behave similar on each platform, but it'll still be native. Shell is like a little bit of a departure for that, where things are being directly drawn on screen, like more of a Flutter type of approach. And that's a departure from the way Xamarin Forms has always really worked. So I think it is. Yeah.
Sure, but similar to Flutter.
Yeah.
Like you said.
Yeah. So it's kind of interesting. Yeah. Two different big changes coming in potentially in 4.0 with Xamarin Forms Shell. All right. Any other questions, comments, anything? Daniel, you're up. Okay. Hopefully we won't break the stream too bad. Oh, my cable, man.
Yeah, like 40%.
Do the honors. Okay, I'm gonna step around you very carefully.
Yeah, all right. So my name is Daniel. I'll be presenting something that I've been doing on BSI, a few challenges that we faced on a current project that we're working on. It's basically how to start data in our app, right? So as I said, I'm Daniel John Kauser. I've been a developer for about 8 years. I'm a blogger and a contributor to the Planet Xamarin community. I'm a Xamarin certified developer. I've been a Xamarin focused developer for about 3 years. You can find me at Daniel Kauser, my Twitter account. And I do have a blog, as I mentioned, called Kauser Exception. It's pretty funny. Yeah, pretty funny name. So I'm gonna start by explaining how most applications, like client applications, deal with regarding database. So especially on mobile applications, we rely a lot in SQLite. So SQLite is the DB engine that is most used in the world. It's cross-platform. You can spin it up on basically anywhere you want. It's also open source. You can find it all about it. You can find the binaries, and you can find the C code at SQLite.org. There's actually, this is according to SQLite.org, but as of today, there are over 1 trillion SQLite databases actively in use. So if you do have a application in your phone, and it's using some sort of offline data, I mean, if your phone is offline and you're dealing with data in your phone, you're probably using SQLite to handle that. And it is the main option for databases for Xamarin developers. So what does starting up data means? So it's basically as soon as your user is logged into your application, you have to have all of that user's data ready for that user to basically use your phone, right? So it usually starts when the user logs in, and you fetch all of that data for that subscription or for that account. This part is very critical, starting up data, because it basically will dictate the acceptance of users to your app. You really want to have startup time less than 5 seconds. For business applications, you could raise that a little bit, because sometimes a user might have a crazy ton of data, and it might take some time to fetch everything from server. Especially if these databases have a big schema, or as I placed there, it's like a list of lists of lists. So you have, I don't know, a product that has a list of, so you have a list of products that has a list of orders, and those orders have a list of receipts. So usually when you have very structured databases, you usually have to pull all of that down and have it ready for the user to start using, right? And another case is when you have master tables, like control tables. I don't know, maybe a list of addresses or a list of countries, something that will never change, and it's usually pretty big. In our case, in our app, we have a few, like a list of fertilizers, like it's a list of products that will never really change, and it's a huge amount of information. Over 10,000, 20,000 rows for that table specifically. So we've had some trouble with the performance, startup performance on our app. And this is an overview of the process that we thought that would solve this issue of starting up all of this data in the phone. Basically, as soon as the user logs in the app, your app would send a request for a database, not pooling the data via a RESTful application. I don't know, you request that information for a few certain endpoints that will handle that entity. Instead of doing that, fetching lists of data to many different actions or controllers, endpoints in your backend, we actually request the database itself. So the app will request the database to an API. The API would check in a file system or somewhere where it's storing files, if there's a SQLite file for that user. If it exists, it just returns the database and the user proceeds. If not, the API will itself generate the SQLite file and then make it available for the user to download, and then the user will proceed to the home page of the app. So downloading the SQLite, it's pretty simple. For crazy amount of data and very complex data structure that you might have, your file might not go over 10 megabytes, 20 megabytes. And currently on the internet that we have, usually it's pretty good to download a file like that in a few seconds only. Now generating the SQLite on the back end, it's actually where the real challenge was for me, for us. It will, I'll dive a little further into that in the next slide. Going further on the SQLite generation on the back end, again, the request will be received by the API. The API will create a file, just a normal empty file.db. On our case, the API will query all of the tables on the SQLite, on the MS SQL. And then it will, for performance, we chose to use ADONet, just writing the queries ourselves and running those queries against the database. Then the next step is actually normalize and convert that data into SQLite data. I mean, types differ, right? So a varchar in MS SQL is a text. So a varchar type in MS SQL is a text type in SQLite. So we do have to translate this information, these types of data, between the SQL database and the SQLite. After that, so another thing is like not only make it, not only the translation part, but also make the data compliant to a certain SDK that we're using, built by the Azure team. It's supposed to make offline handling on Xamarin applications easier. But this SDK, it actually translates data types in SQLite into different types that only this SDK understands. So for instance, byte array, that this SDK uses to version the data between the server and the client. Instead of being a native byte array in SQLite, they converted it into a string. So we had to go through and actually check, what data types are this, is this Azure SDK actually using? So we made some tweaks to make it work. After that, after normalizing and dumping all of the information in the SQLite file, we create the actual table structures in the SQLite file. Then we send the SQLite to to blob storage, Azure blob storage, but any real storage, like file storage, would be of use. It's just to basically leave your files over there. And then we send the URL for that file to the app, and the app will download it. So this whole process might look like a lot of processing, but since the server, like we're relying basically on the cloud power to generate and to run all of this, from a initial sync of data between our apps and the user subscription that was taking about a minute and a half, we were able to load in less than 10 seconds. just by telling the API to generate everything and dump it, download it back to the phone. So it was a major win for our team to see actually like such a performance gain after doing that. What are presentations without demos, right? So I built a POC. It's pretty vanilla. I'm gonna just loop through everything. So I'm just gonna loop through everything we saw. I'm gonna loop through it, and I'm just gonna jump through all of the steps in code actually that I've done for this demo, just to show you guys. This puppy is connecting to an Aspect Core API over here. I'm gonna delete the local SQLite file right now, and then I'm gonna send a request to the API. The API will create it, and I'll download it to the phone. It's generating, downloading, and there it is. Right now on this list, there's 240 items. I've used this little little like JSON generator on the web that's so nice. You can tell how many JSON rows that you want. So my model is pretty simple. It's just an ID and a name, but I could easily scale this up to over 10,000 records, and it's basically the same. Like, it's pretty performant. Ooh, there it is. All right, so right here on the phone, I'm gonna open. This is the Xamarin project, for those who are not familiar with it. This is basically the project structure. I have a core library.
Can you zoom in a little bit?
Zoom in. Oh, damn, yes.
It's Command plus. Should be able to.
I don't think it zooms on the.
You
Oh, yes. Yeah. All right. Like the resolution here is way too damn high. So I basically have a core library just to hold the entity itself, just so I can share it between the API and the Xamarin project. That's one powerful thing of Xamarin, that you actually can share code. So I don't know how you guys in other projects that you have worked on, but usually you would kind of have two classes for representing this this entity. So one in the API and one in the client application. But here we can just share it between both projects. So the API and the Xamarin app are both using the same entity, and you can share more codes, not just this. You can share logic and other things as well. So I'm gonna not show the API right now. I'm gonna show. All right. So this is a little messy, but I've used reactive UI to because I'm learning it, so I decided to do this demo with it. Basically, this is the command to download that we saw on the app. It will fire up dialog, and it's basically says preparing to download. Then we send a request to the API. I have this service here that downloads, and I also have. I'm actually inside this service. I'm using a library called HTTP transfers, which is awesome. It is developed to download things on the background. So it gives me a percentage depending on the size of the file. It will give me a percentage of how much it's still to download the file, like 20%, 100%. And this is basically, I'm just invoking that change of text in the main thread, so the UI actually updates. I'm not like updating it from a background thread. It could cause troubles. Don't do that. Don't update your UI in anywhere that it's not the UI thread, the main UI thread. Then after that, after downloading the SQLite, I'll retrieve the data from the local list. Here is it's to delete the local SQLite. Let me enter this puppy over here. Okay, just real fast. This is basically, this is not the prettiest thing ever, but I have a flag that gets set when the download is done, and then I'll release the code. So while the load is not completed, we'll have the UI, the process running. Here I'm fetching my API over here in my Windows machine on the parallels, and here I'm actually downloading, setting up the HTTP transfer tasks to download the file. That's it for the app. Now let's go to the API over here. I can just show it over here. So let me go controllers. Okay, so this is the action that receives the request to generate the SQLite. First, as I mentioned, we will fetch data from MS SQL that is hosted on my Windows machine as well. Navigate to implementation. Just entering here real fast to show you the code. Hard-coded query. This is much more complex if you're trying to go generic through all of your entities, trying to figure out what are the table names. Here I only have one, so I gave myself the ability to just hard code the table name. Opening the SQLite connection, reading, retrieving the reader from the ADONet. Then over here, I'm mapping the results from MSQL into actual instances of an object using reflection. I'm here looping through all of the results, checking. So right here, I'm actually not only fetching the data, but I'm also picking up all of the properties of the class, all of the properties that I want to create on SQLite. So there's the data and the actual schema that you're gonna create on SQLite. So I don't know, a lot of classes that we have, if you're mapping to entity framework, you might have a list of other entities on the class itself. You don't want to create a column called list of, I don't know, people in your SQLite table. You only want the primitive types like int, string. So you make sure that you're grabbing all of those and creating them back to SQLite. Yeah, so on this service, I'm returning a tuple of a list of properties with a list of data that I just retrieved. Okay, back to the action on the controller. After fetching all of that, I have a second service that actually creates SQLite tables and populates the SQLite database. I'm gonna navigate to it by, not fun navigation on Visual Studio for Mac. So that's the method executed right after querying the data and the properties from MS SQL. Here again, I'm hard coding the queries. I have this. I have the ability to do that. I don't want to. I mean, so the the translation between MS SQL and SQLite is not 100% finished yet. So again, trying to map one-to-one is kind of tricky. So I just hard-coded the create statement and the insert statement. It's pretty simple. Like I'm using Frank Kruger's library called SQLite-net. It makes our lives really easy when fetching data from local SQLite. Without it, without that library, our lives as mobile developers with Xamarin wouldn't be the same. So, beginning transaction, executing the insert statements, and then I'm committing everything, committing all the transaction. Then was just test fetching everything just to see if it was all good. Yeah. Now back to the controller again. And then finally we upload the file to a blob storage. Code is pretty straightforward to upload things to Azure blob storage. This is it, the to-do-db that was just uploaded a few minutes ago. Delete this guy and just run it again so you guys see that I'm not lying. My demo is working. I have Swagger over here. It's pretty nice. Swagger, it's pretty easy to hook up to your ASP.NET Core APIs. You should try it out. Is it created? 200, all good. It should appear here sometime soon. Yeah, there it is, uploaded. Hey. Yeah, so this is basically it. Like it's a simple POC. This has been a great challenge to actually have this POC ready for production. It has been a learning curve to me to understand the inner working of SQLite and how to improve user experience in our app. So this demo was using basically like the mobile client was built using Xamarin Forms 3.5, the latest and greatest. Also, as I mentioned, I'm using HTTP transfer tasks for downloading the SQLite in the app and having a lot of control over it. HTTP client just to send a request to the API. So the API I'm using ASP.NET Core 2.1, latest and greatest, and in the framework, just to do the initial migration and create the database, I had to use migration. So I'm also using ADO.NET and SQLite 1.5, both in the mobile app and on the API. So what is next of all of this? So we've identified that there's a major opportunity for the creation of an open source library for this. Basically creating a database out of another database from MS SQL to SQLite. It seems that a lot of that translation between data and data types is not really available out of the box. So we had to do it all of it ourselves. So we're thinking of starting a NuGet project, like an open source project to basically solve that issue. Just copying one schema into another and migrate all of the data. And it's not just like the select star that I did. Like you actually have to filter that data out. Like you do have to filter by subscription or by user ID. In a lot of times, this query might be complex because you're not only fetching table per table, but you do have to fetch data like using joins, because a lot of tables do not have a reference to a user account itself, but it's linked to data that is linked to a user account. So you have to be able to fetch all of this graph of data and actually copying it all over into somewhere else. So it might be a cool idea. We're still thinking of the details of how it could be. And of course, like we do call for helpers if you have a GitHub account and you want to join us and just start some conversations on some libraries that we already have and some that we're planning on doing. Just feel free and join us. So there are some useful links that for this presentation, SQLite.org, my Twitter, and my GitHub account. This demo, this presentation will be on my GitHub account as well as in the Toronto Mobile Developers GitHub account. So if you want to grab this code and run it yourself, modify, play with it, feel free. That's it for me, guys.
And
Thank
it's
you.
on your blog.
And it's on my blog. Like I just posted, I just started this week like a series of blog posts that will cover not the simple thing of the POC, but actually the very details of what we did to all of the granularity of details that this OSS library is going to take and that it took to actually build it. I can maybe show it to you guys real fast. Yay. So it's just a part one of the, just basically placing all of the goals and all of the details of what the issue is and what's the proposed solution to it, giving all of the libraries that are used and how this is going to be better, like how this approach to solving the issue of starting data in your client applications, how this will solve that issue for you. Yeah, this is just an overview, and then the next post I'll be going deeper into what the solution is. So yeah, guys, that's it for me. Thank you.
Question, what data did you use?
Sorry?
What data generator did you use on data generator?
For populating the,
Yeah.
So let me grab it. So what I did is I ran the initial migration to create my data, and then I used Entity Framework's seed method to,
Okay.
yeah. So after that, once the model is creating, Entity Framework will call this method called seed.
Okay.
And what I did is I've placed on the project this big JSON payload that it's basically a copy of my data structure. Okay. And I read this file, converted it into actual data, actual instances of the class. Yep. Using Newtonsoft JSON, and then I use it Entity Framework to insert everything. Okay. So there's this. This is the JSON generator that I used. Like, you can basically build any data structure, like any JSON structure. So you can like create your own particular need, and you can like create thousands of rows. Like here, it's only gonna create like 7 of this complex JSON structure, but like I can easily type over here like 10,000, and it will generate like 10,000 rows of this puppy. So it's awesome. It's awesome, like to stress test stuff. Yeah. Like it's really cool.
Cool. Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. So any questions, guys? I just said goodbye.
You're gonna move anyways.
Yeah. All right. Come on, Saamer.
It's gonna be hard to beat that.
Or possibly.
All right. Thank you.
You want the charger?
It's one of the older ones. It's okay. I think.
Okay, cool.
Let's see, where does it go?
Is it HDMI? You have that?
No, it's not.
Which one do you have?
The FireWire.
This one?
Yeah. Anyone have it? I don't think so. I have it on Android. Sorry, on Google.
Hey, you can use mine if you want.
Google Drive.
Want?
Yeah.
Yeah, do it.
Do that.
You're having a demo or something? Or?
I did have it.
Oh, check. There's a few adapters over there. See if any works. Yeah? Dude. Beautiful. Nice.
Let's see.
Start reading it. Try to unplug it, plug it in again.
Display.
Oh, try to use this one. This is.
No, this
No, this one is not yours.
Display port's not working.
Yeah.
Yeah. Let's see.
It's the constant muck around battle, right?
Yeah, we've been struggling with these guys.
Yes, definitely this way.
How many developers does it take?
How many?
Change the light.
It's I
You
have
can
a
use
demo
my-
on this.
You can use my.
But
my
I'll use your
laptop.
laptop for the presentation at least.
What did I say?
I changed my laptop like a week ago. Just my luck.
Is there there's no other adapters hanging around?
No, I don't see this one. Does anyone have a FireWire adapter by any chance?
You know what they do? Try this one. It's just a different one. Maybe this one's not good. Give it a shot. There we go. It might be.
Yeah.
Think it's gonna go?
Yeah. Seems like something's gonna
Something's happening.
Something's definitely happening.
So now we've got like. It was working. Because it's going through the Alberto, it might not be doing so well. So we might have to just adjust the stream. Hold on. I'll just get the camera to capture it. So let's do this.
Yeah.
Let's plug it directly into the. Oh, look, another one. It's a third. Third time's a charm?
Third time is a charm. I have a feeling that this one might work.
Yeah.
Yeah, something's happening. Was this for the stream? Is that what it
Yeah,
was?
here we go.
So is it not streaming?
No, it's good.
Okay, yeah.
It's gonna come up. Nope, or not. Oh, yeah, we're
There we
good.
go.
Yes, okay, careful not to touch any of the cables or breathe too heavy.
Alright guys, how's it going? Just a few more minutes. So, who over here has had to deal with accessibility? Anyone accessibility while development? 2 people? It's not bad. So okay, today I'm gonna try to help. Wait, let's see, Dylan. Dylan, have you ever?
Did it just die?
Still working here. The live stream is streaming it.
Yeah, the live stream's good. Don't have to worry about people in the room.
Watch on your phones.
Let's, yeah.
There it is.
Okay. Yeah, Dylan, had you ever had to do anything with accessibility?
I've had to do a little bit, but not a lot.
Okay, so today, hopefully, I can help show you guys some stuff about accessibility. So this will come towards the end. And presentation. Present. So I'm Saamer Mansoor. I have been working with Xamarin for the past 2 years. I've mainly done Xamarin Native, done a little bit of Xamarin Forms professionally, but mainly focused on Xamarin Native. There are a lot of major companies that are using Xamarin Native. Some Verizon, I don't know if you guys know of it, Spectrum, like there's a lot of big names and really highly rated apps that are using Xamarin, and which is a really good thing. And so there's a huge demand for Xamarin developers. I just moved from the United States in June, and comparatively, it's still growing over here. But today I want to talk about Android accessibility. I was supposed to speak last month, but circumstances, really terrible ones. Yeah, and so accessibility, there's basically two main functions when you're trying to make an application accessible. Whenever you're developing something, there's two things that you have to keep in mind. Only two things. The first thing is that user able to see all the information? Is he able to gather all that you're trying to tell that user from that application? So if you have a bank app, is a deaf user able to use it? You know, like, is he able to see everything? Yeah, so that means a deaf user would be able to see it. You know, is a colorblind user able to see it? So the first one, like I said, is gathering information. Is a blind user able to you know, gather the information, like see his balance, you know, make a transfer? The second thing that you have to keep in mind is, are they able to perform the functions that the app allows you to do? If you're paying a bill on the app, are the users able to pay a bill through the app? Or are the users able to make that transfer? So just two things that you have to keep in mind. First one is see all the information. Second one is able to perform the functions. So where does accessibility, you know, what lays down the framework for accessibility? Sadly, we don't really have a unified mobile, you know, sort of organization that decides what constitutes accessibility. And we follow the WCAG, the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines. And basically Apple and Android, they have just gone through all those guidelines. There are like so many pages and pages of them. And they have decided, okay, you know, in order to meet the guidelines, these are things that we have to take care of. Because we're not a website, so we don't have to take care of all of those guidelines. There's just a few. And here's some of them that, or at least like the major ones. Very simple, easy to read text. Not everyone has a 20/20 eyesight, you know? And imagine if this text was blurry. Like, you know, would you be able to read it? No, you'd be like so annoyed, you would barely be able to read it. You know, you'd be like, this is the worst app ever, you know? So accessibility doesn't only have to do with like blind people or, you know, people with hearing impairments. And it's for everyone, you know, kind of like ramps when you're going to a hospital. Not only people who, you know, have a wheelchair use it, older people use it too, you know? So it's always about a lot of things put together. Third thing, dynamic font sizing. For people who have weaker eyesight, generally they will increase the size of the font on their phones. And so a lot of times we don't develop apps to where when you increase the size, all the fonts in the app also increase size. You know, it'll be like the entire app has like large fonts, but then your app has like the tiniest font, you know, so that's definitely inaccessible. Also, sometimes, you know, we overlook because the font size, when it's larger, the font will go outside the screen. So definitely people are not able to read it, so your app is inaccessible. And then there's guidelines for minimum tappable buttons or icon size. This is something that we usually overlook. You know, if there's a button or an icon, like an information icon, you know, there are guidelines that say this is the minimum you should have. And for iOS, because we're doing Xamarin, so we kind of you know, go for the most conservative one. And iOS has a 44 pixel diameter minimum requirement. So if the information icon is smaller than 44 pixels, it is inaccessible, and you know, you won't get kicked out from the App Store, but it's inaccessible. And it's like you only have to do a few things in order to be like one of the accessible apps, and you make people's lives so much easier, the people who actually require this. Minimum contrast ratio. So for black and white text, the contrast ratio is 21:1. I'm not 100% sure where they come up with the math for it, but that's basically what it is. And so there is a minimum contrast ratio for fonts against the background. You know, you cannot have green and then dark green, you know, like green text on a dark green background. Like, that's the worst, especially for colorblind people. And then enable talkback. So talkback is a functionality that is most often associated with accessibility. Dylan spoke about Xamarin Forms trying to make it more accessible for users, and they were mainly speaking about talkback. There might have been a little bit about dynamic font sizing, but it's primarily about talkback, and usually, more often, people use the two terms at the same time, when obviously, clearly, they're not the same. You know, accessibility is a whole wide list of things, but talkback is just one part of it. Today I'm going to dig into talkback because it's something that it's the more challenging one of them, and if you guys want details to any of them, like the links and things like that, I have it in the notes of the slide. So how do you activate talkback on your device? So initially, talkback was just an app that you download, but starting June 21st of last year, they made it a part of the Android Accessibility Suite. You download the app, Android Accessibility Suite, and then it gives you that, it gives you the ability to check talkback in the settings. So you just go to accessibility, and it'll say talkback, and you can just check it, and you're done. You know, so that's why it's also like number 3 trending. But essentially, you know, if you don't have the app, you just download it, and then you'll be able to see it in the settings. And this is true for all modern Android devices. For talkback on your emulator, I know most of you use Visual Studio, and you're actually able to get talkback on your emulator. And this was a huge thing. We didn't know this was possible. So when we were able to do it, we were like, whoa, it's so cool. All you gotta do is go to your tools, device manager, you get to your device manager, edit that device, and allow Google Play Store. You know, so this is the, are you guys able to see it?
Yep.
Okay, cool. You see how some of them have stuff next to it, and some of them don't have anything next to it. So the ones that have Google Play next to it are the ones that you can go to the Play Store and basically download the Android Accessibility Suite. So that's basically what I was saying. Now, basic gestures. When you have an app, when you have your talkback turned on, there's some basic things that you can do to go through it. It's, you know, they can't see, so they don't know exactly where to go. So they basically have to scroll through the items one at a time. I will give you guys a short demo of what it would look like. So basically what I did, go to settings, accessibility. I'm going to turn the volume. Is the volume turned up?
I don't know. It's because you're HDMI.
Yeah, so that's probably still the audio.
Go into your audio settings and you can switch it back to
That's
max sound.
yeah.
Yeah, click on the sound.
Sound. Oh yeah, that's true. Output.
Yeah, just click
Internal speakers?
Yeah, internal speakers.
Yeah.
All right, cool. So it's going to play the audio as if I'm using.
Settings in list 2 items.
So
Tap to activate.
it gets really annoying when you're doing like a talkback, when you're doing an accessibility story. But if I press left on my keyboard, it's like you're swiping left. So I'm going to press left right now. Okay.
Settings.
Hey.
Went. Settings. On. Switch out of list. Press Alt plus enter to toggle. Settings. When talkback is on, it provides spoken feedback so that you can use your device without looking at the screen.
So it like reads out everything.
You are blind or have low vision. To navigate using talkback, swipe right or left between items.
You know, and then there's an entire like thing. So and then whenever you want to press a button, you just select where the button that you're trying to select, and then you just double tap on the screen, and it'll go back. So it's selected the back button, so I just double tap anywhere on the screen and it'll go back, because the user doesn't know exactly where on the phone screen they are. For them it's just like, oh, it's the back button. Okay.
Security and location, screen lock, fingerprint, in list 13 items.
Does that kind of make sense? It's like you basically, and it gives the sign double tap to activate. So it's like it says what exactly the item is, and then it says gives the option of what to do. So basically, I explained that over here. I'm saying, hey, these are the basic gestures. If you swipe right, you move to the next item. Swipe left, you move to the previous item. And then if you double tap, it actually opens that page up. And then you can swipe up or down in order to change the speed of your talkback. And then these are like more advanced gestures. If you want to go to the home screen, swipe left and up, swipe right and up. And then you can like pull to refresh too. So in terms of, so that's like more testing focused. For QA devs, they have to basically make sure that the app is accessible, that people are able to click on buttons when they double tap. They're able to hear that double tap to activate, in order to open that other page. And then if it's a link, it says, open this page link. It'll give you a hint. So who here uses Saamer Native? Saamer Native? Saamer Native? All right, a few people use Saamer Native. This is more deeper into the code. Android provides a library in its accessibility class, and essentially, if you open a page, you can make it focus somewhere. So generally whenever you open a screen and you want it to go to a certain part of the screen to start, all you got to do is say, announce, and it goes through the context and sees where exactly you want it to go. It finds the exact view, and it makes the announcement, basically accessibility event, obtain, and then event announcement. So this is more, we abstracted the announcement into a static class, a utility class essentially, and then focus. So basically you want to focus somewhere, because the focus and announcement are two separate activities. You can focus on something and it doesn't announce, and you can announce something and it doesn't focus. For example, if you go to a different screen and you want the user to know what screen they're going to, you can say announce, and then the billing page, and then it'll know, the user will know that they're in the billing page now. And especially if you have an image, images generally don't have text. Like when you develop code, that images just have the image source file. They don't really have it doesn't describe what the image does. You can have the glyph icon for information, but the user doesn't know because he can't see that it's an information button. So we actually tell it to announce that. For example, in our example, what we did is whenever you clicked on the right button, whenever you go to the next page in a calendar, we wanted it to focus on the day, the month and the year. So as soon as you click on the right arrow, we wanted the user to hear December 2018. So we'd focus December 2018 and we'd announce December 2018. So it's just stuff that it's easy for us to do these things, but for a user, he doesn't know exactly what's going on. In this particular case, that's exactly what I'm showing over here. I'm saying, hey, as soon as you click on the next month, if you notice over here, click next month, and then it'll change the page, but it'll also announce the current month.txt and it'll focus on the current month. And I have this presentation up. I'll share it with you guys on my GitHub so you guys can see it. And then content description. This is really, really good for you guys to implement. It's something that's simple to do, makes a ton of difference. So the right arrow over there was no content description like this one. It would just say IC underscore cone or something like that. And the same for the left arrow. It would say IC underscore cone Y. So the user is like IC underscore cone, November 2018, IC underscore cone Y, what's going on? So all you gotta do is set a content description on the image, So we just set the content description to text next month button. That's it, and it makes a world of a difference for users. Sometimes it'll even say unlabeled image, So it's very simple for users like us to actually implement. Just look for content description or hint or stuff like that. Important for accessibility. So for people who have touched AXML, I know there are not a lot of people, but they're basically properties. There's a text property for the control, there's the gravity, style, things like that, and then there's just important for accessibility. Is this element important for accessibility or not? So we, according to accessibility standards, we don't want to read the days of the week. As soon as you go to November 2018, it's November 2018. The user doesn't need to, when you swipe right, what's the point of going through Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, and then going to the days? That's definitely not important for accessibility. Yeah, it would make sense if every time you went on this, it would say 5th November, Monday, But that's not what was going on. So we basically just set important for accessibility to false, to no. So it's pretty simple stuff. It's not very complicated, but it makes a huge difference. So then there's another thing called Accessibility Manager. What we noticed is, we had an issue that was just breaking our heads. It was we had implemented this calendar view. Calendar views, for those of you who have touched Android, they're not native to Android. And so what happens is that you have to make it from scratch. And when you make something from scratch, you have to take into account accessibility as well. But a lot of people don't. People suck. So you just use these libraries, and they suck with accessibility. And then you have this application that when you test it with an accessibility tester, they're just cross, cross, cross. So what we noticed when we were digging through it, that YouTube, for example, if your accessibility is on, if your talkback is on, it changes the view from this. This is what the standard view that we see, isn't it? So it changes the view from this to this for accessibility users, and it doesn't. It always keeps this screen there because they're not really watching; they're mostly hearing. So it keeps the screen there, and they can actually like skip 10 seconds forwards, 10 seconds back. And so the accessibility manager helps us do that, where it just checks to see whether or not accessibility is on. If it's on, then hide something, you know? So if you look at it, it doesn't say the date. It used to say date Monday, November 5th. It doesn't say that anymore. So we just hid it because, you know, there was an issue over there. So, and then live regions. Sometimes when you have a form and you fill out the wrong month, you fill out the wrong phone number. You know, you have 11 digits instead of just 10. So what you can set the live region for text field, and it to true or to what? Yeah, polite. And there's a few different assertive, polite, and none. So that it will give you an error message and it'll announce that error message if it's displayed. So it'll say, oh, you know, you filled out 11 digits, fix it. You know, so it's pretty neat that way. And then there's the accessibility delegate. All views have their own accessibility delegate. You can override that, and it'll, you know, override the default functionality of that view. So you can go really, really deep. That's all I had to present in terms of the presentation. I'll show a quick video. The audio will be kind of soft, so just bear with me. Come on, let's make it. Here. I wasn't sure which one to present. I was like, should I present Apple Business Chat or should I present Android Accessibility? So I just chose Android Accessibility.
It's really useful.
Thank you. So this basically, you know, it has the presentation, and I placed a video link here. So I'm going to expand, and so you guys are aware what's going on over here. I kind of explained it with the PDF, but you guys can hear it now. So what I'm trying to do is I'm basically trying to make sure that when you go to the previous month, it focuses and announces November 2018.
Previous month button. Cell this previous month button. December 2018. Previous month button. November 2018. Cancel. Payment amount. Payment date the 6th of November. November 2018. View pager description.
Yeah. So basically, it focused on. It announced November 2018. As soon as you open the payment date, it announced November 2018 is the month that you're looking at, and it's going through the different days of the month. Okay, quickly, I know a lot of people use Xamarin Forms, so I was like, okay, let me bring in some Xamarin Forms because you guys like Xamarin Forms. Sadly, I don't want to get you guys too excited. So Xamarin Forms